So if you don't know Ashton, we are a climate solutions charity working in the UK and in low-income countries around the world. We support organisations of all kinds that are working towards a fairer, better, zero-carbon world. We raise these organisations' profiles with key audiences, help them win funding, create network opportunities, and help them share insights and ultimately campaign for change. Today, we'll be looking at some powerful photography showing the lives of smallholder dairy farmers in India who are struggling to access sustainable cooling. And we'll be hearing about one solution that is bringing opportunities to these communities. We're also going to discuss the power of visual storytelling and the wider cooling challenge. So over the next 60 minutes, we will hear from expert speakers in photography, climate and cooling innovation, and there'll be time for questions at the end. So please do use the Q&A feature or the chat box to note down your questions as we go, and we'll tackle them when the presentations are finished. So this session is part of Ashton's Fair Cooling Fund. This is a 2-year initiative backed by the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Programme, KCEP, and it's helping 7 businesses and organisations around the world to widen access to affordable, sustainable cooling. As temperatures rise around the globe, about 2 billion people lack access to cooling, and this threatens incomes, health, and their ability to create resilient lives and communities. Ironically, conventional mechanised cooling is a huge driver of emissions, pushing temperatures higher and creating really a vicious climate cycle. Fair Cooling Fund members co-develop projects widening access to sustainable cooling and have received a grant from the fund to make their plans a reality. The fund has focused on creating inclusive, participatory solutions that meet the needs of those at risk. It brings cooling organisations together to learn from each other and raises awareness of proven cooling solutions to those with the power to really drive this forwards. The work of our cohort covers cooling in homes, outdoors, in towns and cities, but it also includes access to cold chain, by which we mean the chain of cooling for things like medicine and food. And cold chain is really where this story we're looking at today sits. So I will hand over to Prashanth Vishwanathan to take you through highlights from his photos taken in Latur, India, back in November. This series explores the lives of farmers previously affected by lack of access to cold chain, many of whom are now benefiting from a new sustainable and affordable solution by innovator Promethean Power Systems, who we're also going to hear from later in the session. Prashanth, perhaps you could start by telling us a bit about your work and about your background, and then we'll take a look at your photos after that.
Hi. Good afternoon and good evening for us. This shoot with in Latur was in between the 2 waves of pandemic that India has had. So the one big difference than any other year going to shoot was the fact that a lot of people, on top of the issue of heat, a lot of people had no access to means of generating income. While Latur, I have visited even 10 years ago, 10 to 11 years ago, and I've been visiting regularly that area. Historically, we had a huge forest there, and right now it's a very hot belt, and it's extremely dry, arid weather. So, sorry, I've jumped into the topic directly. So
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a photojournalist. I shoot documentary photography. I've been shooting drought in central India for 15 years now in various different capacities, as news, sometimes as features, as sometimes as just some of my own projects, which has led me to these situations. One interesting aspect about this drought in the central part of the country is that there is a lot of grass all around, so it looks green. There are old trees because of the old forest there, but the amount of moisture does not sustain a crop. So the income from crops is very limited as much as sustainability. So livelihood issues are huge, and there are areas that are very highly affected, Latu being one of them. Very, very hot. I think it gets very hot in the summers. So the first picture that we just went past was on, the small dairy holding farmers. So, there are 2 cows, and, that's about it. That is about the whole family of 5 to 6 people would have to survive on a land which is not very, cultivable, and the milk of the cows. So milk of the cows wasn't an option. So when I spoke to people even a few years ago, the cow milk was not could not survive the heat. So they would not save it. So they would just use it for consumption, and sale was not an option. You can go to the next thing. One more aspect today, after the Lakshmi dairy was the dairy in this village, has come up, is that women have taken an initiative to work together to make sure that the cooling initiative and then the way the cows are kept and treated are. So there were a lot of women protagonists in this whole shoot, where they were taking lead in dealing with this milk production and distribution. Go to the next slide. Also, one more thing is that the availability, people were not even keeping cows earlier, and that was something that benefited a lot. There were a lot of instances in this shoot where we had to actually go and shoot people who had just bought more cattle after the pandemic had started, because they think there's a future, in their after the intervention of cooling solutions have reached them. You can go to the next one. So typically a morning in a village where women collect milk and start coming towards the dairy every day. We had to follow COVID protocols, so otherwise it's a very crowded affair. People come together, chit chat, there's a lot of gossip. But in this case, people were coming one by one, and there was a slot system that was used to reach the dairy. And next one. Yeah, so this person was very interesting. I can source his name. He had bought 7 more cows because he felt that there is profitability and in the milk production in the future. So he had literally gone procured more cows. But as you can see the terrain, there are fields here because we have been in November here. So there is one more aspect that I would like to talk is a lot of my shoots training for this. A lot of the times we are sent as photographers are times right after the monsoon. So it looks very green, the crops, etc. Which is why it gets very innovative to shoot drought and monsoon. But even having said that, the condition of the land itself, seen in some of the pictures, is pretty dry and just temporarily moist. So he was actually at the brink of he was actually taking them for a walk in the evening for grazing, but in the sense he had actually invested in cows because he felt that there's a future in milk for them. And of course, as a photographer, I think it's very important to have a different perspective of everything. And I wanted to be inside the bucket of milk when it is the cow is getting milked, and I had a GoPro camera which I just kept inside and shot blind. But I think the reason is that the reason the need that this is something that is a new kind of an income for them. It never was an option before. It was something that I was wanting to highlight at that point.
Great, thanks, Prashanth. Really striking images, and we will look at a second batch of your photos later on in the session. Those images were commissioned by Ashton through Climate Visuals, the creators of the world's only evidence-based and impact-focused climate photography resource. Climate Visuals Programme Lead Toby Smith joins our conversation today. Toby, hi, it's great to have you with us.
And thanks for having me.
Could you share why photography is such a powerful tool for creating climate action?
Yeah, I might be a little bit biased, as before joining Climate Outreach, I spent 12 years as an environmental photojournalist, and I think, but in that time and kind of stepping away from the camera, even in the last 2 years, I've seen even much more how much imagery leads and supports nearly all media headlines, information and messaging, especially in the digital space, which is obviously starting to take over a lot of forms of communication. And it's such a it's almost a cliche, but yes, it is a universal language that can reach across different languages and different cultures and inspires an emotional response in people. But I think the reason why, climate visuals exist is, sadly, what we're seeing is the generation, curation and application of imagery is often really disengaged from the social research into actually what works with audiences or different audiences across society. And the Climate Visuals program is to kind of try and help that potential of images using what's the speciality of Climate Outreach, the parent organization, using social science, reports, research and guidelines around how to communicate more effectively. I think there's another aspect to it. I think photography or images they've really had their integrity and their values tested quite recently in the media. But there's something about maybe perhaps both, quality professional photojournalism, like we've just seen for the last presentation, and also I think the kind of grittier, real user-generated content on social media that still continues to have a real sense of truth and urgency and immediacy about it. And to me, that's one of the reasons why I'm still so attracted and pleased to be working in imagery as part of kind of communications that is part of inspiring positive climate action with people.
We've seen some really powerful images from Prashant. In your view, what are the principles of good climate photography?
So, one of Climate Visuals' most useful engagement tools is our 7 Climate Visuals principles, and I'm very tempted, but I won't try and dash through all 7 and some of the extra ones in the next couple of minutes. But I just really like to signpost them. So climatevisuals.org is, as you mentioned, it's our image library, but there's also some evidence there and some principles on how to both shoot, commission, or edit and procure good climate photography. And I think it's a distillation of kind of much wider social science research into how people respond to different imagery. But within that, I just want to convey while I'm here that they are principles. They're not hard and fast rules. And they're something that I hope people can use, and the images in combination with their own expertise, what they know about their audiences, which is really critical, and also the subjectivity of what makes photography aesthetic and really beautiful. And I think one of the things why it was such a pleasure to find Prashanth, and I'm so pleased that he did this commission with Ashton on this topic, is that as a photojournalist, those principles were something that were just natural in the way that he engaged and produced work, both for yourselves, Ashton, Climate Visuals as the kind of client or the intermediary of that work, and also the way they convey a sense of place and story and response to those to that part of place in India. Even just then in that lecture, I was transported there and saw the immediacy of the issue. So again, it's that balance between social science and photography's qualities as a medium. Yeah,
and the impact on the viewer is so important. But how can we make sure that climate photography is authentic, inclusive, and ethical in its process?
So I think this is something that's starting to change in photography, and I see huge parallels in photography, photojournalism, with also journalism research in field research, and the wider development sector. We're starting to see, and we need to continue to kind of move away from wading in to these scenarios or subjects with our own existing preconceptions. Often in subject matters like this, there can be really damaging Western preconceptions that can actually be sometimes really quite harmful in continuing stereotypes. And I think the journey that I really want to kind of hope photography continues to go on, and wider work like this is obviously towards much more participation and co-design with how the images are produced. But then ultimately, we want to try and think about kind of capacity building and actually kind of almost stepping away directly from the production of that work, so that people in communities on the ground can tell stories themselves in their own voice. There's tons of challenges here that, about the aesthetics of photography and the networks, but I think maybe even COVID, dare I say it, has helped us accelerate a little bit that kind of decentralized way of helping to decentralize production of work.
What advice would you have for other socially focused organisations who really want to boost their impact through photography?
I think I tried to think of a heading that would summarize this, but I'll be frank, I think resourcing is a great place to start, as many communications and PR teams or social media teams trying to come across photography or any kind of campaign material will testify that the resources are important. And if there's a fundraising component, or that value can be tracked, that can be seen as an investment. But photography intrinsically, it's difficult to measure the direct impact of this visual layer or this visual part of messaging, and that can then be a challenge from a resourcing perspective. But I also think there's other ways of doing that without necessarily just changing people's budget lines. But it's just about the intrinsic great qualities of what's good storytelling as well, and good stories start early in a process, through collaboration. So my recommendation is obviously resources, but thinking about it much earlier in the curve of a project. It's no good thinking about the communications or the photography in the final 5% of a project's life cycle, because actually it's that transect across the change that we're trying to create. And the obvious one in climate, I always say, is how can we move this from climate causes and climate impacts through to climate solutions? And I think there's a lot of project-based work which has a similar cycle. So we do well to start thinking about the storytelling from the beginning of that process.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Toby. It's fascinating to hear your insight on this topic.
Cool. Thanks, Ellen.
Great. And we are joined today by Jiten Ghelani. So Jiten is the CEO of Promethean Power Systems, a member of the Ashton Fair Cooling Fund cohort. Promethean have been offering village-level milk chilling in the communities featured in Prashanth's photos. And their sustainable technology means that farmers can connect with wider supply chains and boost their income and resilience. Jiten, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Ellen. Glad to be here.
We'll be seeing your solutions in action in just a few minutes. First, can you tell us more about the challenges faced by the farmers in Prashanth's photos from your perspective?
Yes, thank you to Ashton and the Fair Cooling Fund and partners for the support and for this very, I think, timely discussion. And the images, I think, tell the story. And it reminds me of my visits to Latur area as well. And it really gives you some context. I mean, these are essentially small and marginalized dairy farmers in very remote villages facing many challenges and obstacles, including heat stress, as we've pointed out. With limited infrastructure, lack of reliable power, and lack of cold storage, which really inhibits their opportunities for supplying milk and produce to formal markets in a fair and reliable manner. And so as a result, these farmers, majority of whom are women, are often dependent on unorganized channels to supply their milk, and don't often receive timely and fair payments for their produce. And as a result, these farmers are not actually inclined to invest in further activities related to farming and dairy farming. And in fact, these could provide a steady and sustainable income for their families and also provide quality, nutritious food to the local markets. So by providing certain solutions that are more tailored and appropriate for the local context and the appropriate infrastructure, including certain inputs, services, credit, etc., we can help empower and help these farmers maximize their income generating potential.
Can you tell us a bit more about those solutions and those services that Promethean Power Systems offers to the communities?
Sure. So what we've done in conjunction with the local community, in conjunction with the NGO partner SSP that has been operating in the area for a long time, we've designed a solution which we're calling village level refrigeration hubs that are well suited for sustainable milk chilling in villages with poor electricity and poor infrastructure. What we do is we provide a modular cold storage technology based on thermal energy storage that can operate in areas with unreliable power. And eliminate the need for diesel generators. We provide remote monitoring to ensure minimal maintenance and downtime, and pay-as-you-go financing to remove any upfront costs and barriers for adoption, while connecting these farmers and villages that have smaller amounts of milk to markets in an economically viable way. And what this does is essentially we provide a solution that can enable chilling in these remote areas and storage to maintain the milk until it's ready for transport. And we also provide milk analyzing equipment in each center so that every farmer's milk is tested, weighed, segregated into separate cans, and then the farmers are paid directly into their bank accounts at a transparent and fair rate. And then we also provide formal purchase agreements and linkages with dairy processors, both large and local processors. And as a result, what happens is the dairy processors receive higher quality milk sourced directly from the farmers, and the farmers receive fair and reliable access to market. In addition, once we have this infrastructure set up, it enables new opportunities, and farmers gain new opportunities, flexibility, and ability to offer milk to multiple purchasers directly to households. And as we set up more hubs in this area, they can also increase their income with microprocessing and additional cold storage related services. So over time, what we can see is a dramatic change in the opportunity set for these communities. And that's what makes this most exciting. By enabling access to these refrigeration solutions and cold storage infrastructure, we hope to enable a more inclusive expansion of the dairy sector to areas that have been really poorly served and help improve livelihoods of many of these marginalized dairy farmers.
And from your work with these dairy farmers, what are the impacts that you see? And I know that women and empowering women is a focus of your work. Can you say a little bit about this dimension as well?
Sure. So, you know, in each village, you can typically we would serve 30 to 50 women farmers primarily, who are directly responsible for the day-to-day dairy farming activities. We basically provide them with stronger and greater access to markets, fair, transparent remuneration and payments into their bank accounts. In fact, digital payments and helps them build up a credit history and savings opportunities and access to credit. We also provide access to support services and inputs to improve their productivity and overall financial well-being. And then over time, with this income security and enhanced resilience, we see a greater incentive and confidence for the women farmers to really expand their dairy and non-dairy farming activities, and leads to a steady income stream for their families. And then over time really leads to a greater decision-making related to agricultural and financial matters. And then lastly, more opportunities for rural employment for women in all aspects of the value chain, including collection, testing, chilling, and operating these hubs.
And we're really excited to be working with you on some of these issues through the Fair Cooling Fund. So what's the future for Promethean? How are you hoping to grow, and what are the conditions and the factors that you need to do so?
So what we believe is that decentralized cold storage and milk chilling can unleash new opportunities. And we work with various stakeholders to enable refrigeration at the doorstep of farmers. We work with large and small dairies, and we work directly with farmer groups to bring this necessary infrastructure, especially in the face of climate change, and also with opportunities. As we see, there's more demand for fresh and high quality milk products. There's increasing demand for dairy products and nutrition and protein in India. And there's a greater need for livelihood opportunities for small and marginalized farmers. So what we aim to do by providing access to finance and for these the necessary infrastructure, we can bring this to the doorstep of farmers and really unleash new opportunities for all stakeholders.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jiten. Now we will return to Prashanth, who can take us through some of his photos featuring the Promethean solution that we've just heard about from Jiten.
Hi. Yeah, so after the things, but one of the few things that I did, see a lot in this shoot was the role of women, which is something that if everybody is in context with how India works, in a lot of states, the role of women in in our language we're calling them women farmers, but in reality the status is very different. They are always accompanied by their father or husband, and it's a kind of a little bit of a old school society. Having said that, in this case, the machines were managed by women. The milk was collected by women. Actually, many of the people, involved in collecting the money and giving back the distribution of, the income itself, like not the physical distribution, it was online into the bank accounts, but the slips and everything was done by women. So that was something that was evident in all the centers we went. This is a typical center, which is a local milk collection center. So there are these milk testing equipment on the left, and milk is being put in these cans to weigh, and every farmer gets a slip of how much was the fat content and what is the kind of income that he or she has generated for that session on that day. We go to the next one. So there is a milk testing personnel who arrives in various centers, and this is one of them testing the quality of the milk in that center. This was something that was interesting because the hub was just shifting from one location to another. So I said it's kind of a good opportunity to see the hub being the cooling the unit being installed. So this is an engineer from Promethean who is here setting it up in a village. So tin sheets, simple setup. Also, these places they are set up are owned by villagers in their own spaces they have. So I think I don't know the logistics of it, but it is right inside their premises. We can go to the next one. Yeah, so this was interesting. This is something that I was trying to follow this van. So this is Gokul is I think the brand is the brand of milk that goes. So this is a cooling refrigerator van that goes to collect milk and take it to deliver it to places wherever they are. So yeah, so I just was following the van around. He was parked there, and there was this traditional bullock cart which is still used to transport. I think he's transporting feed, or I think he's transporting his crop to the local mandi. So I thought it was very relevant to the change that is coming in their side. So it's kind of India is a huge country and a lot of people are catching up. So it's kind of a huge divide between the two solutions. We are seeing a refrigerator solution in a place where still transport modes like these are used today. Next. So this is COVID protocol. People can't enter homes. Milk used to just arrive in my house all the time. But somebody rings the bell and gives it to my mother. But now with COVID, I think it was all outside the main gate kind of delivery. I just like that this is in Latur main city. So here we have traveled from that village where this milk was packed for at least it's a 40 minutes drive. So milk cool in the early morning, 4 a.m. the ladies and pack the milk in plastic these towers, and then they transport it. And there are individual people who know the quality of this milk is good, and they order. There was no branding yet on these milk, but they were being delivered door to door. Yeah. So any questions or anything?
Thank you, Prashanth. I think just one question from me. From your perspective as a photographer, what is it that makes this photo series that you've done with Promethean so visually impactful?
I think any see, I have 2-3 perspectives to this. One is in a times that we live in photography, right? So there are 4 million photographs an hour. Okay, so there is the relevance of photography, like as Tobys was mentioning earlier, it's very different in today's era than even what it was when I started 10 years ago. It was a very different thing. So if I have a thoughtful photo with a good story, it had far more value, or it had a far more, impact. But today, with so much bombardment of photography, it's very difficult for us to, separate how can a photo shoot look different or important. One thing that makes it different is the amount of work that has been done on the field. That shows. So if there is a lot of impact on the field, the photography actually gets easier. So it can be a 3-day affair where I get so many options, but it can be a 3-day affair where I get 1 or 2 options because I'm struggling with the concept. So that's the big difference. So there was a lot of stories on the field. Like I was like, anywhere I go, somebody's telling me, oh no, I did this, I did that. So here I'm like selecting and choosing, okay, this is visually impactful, that is normal. And after some time, the normal becomes very normal, and then you look for more stories that is a little bit more twisty turny. So the issue with the shoot was nothing to do with this story. It was COVID. So people were running away from this city man who had arrived in a village, and they were like, you are the issue. So I was like double masked and standing far away all the time. But that was the more of I think now I think that the distance is reduced. People are more open to because the villages also got impacted with COVID now. So the thing is that was the big difference. But on the field, it was more like there was so much of change due to this. The people were like, we could go to some milking center and milk collection center and tell us somebody who's impacted, and they say, oh, go there, 7,000. We just walk into the house, we start talking to someone, and they start saying, oh, this is what happened. So it was not like we had prepped them to say, go find out a story for us, and then we had gone with the case study. So a lot of these things were there on the field, which kind of is a very warm thing to know. And that also impacts the problem.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Prashanth. And it's great to hear about your experiences on the ground as well. So via Promethean Power Systems, we've heard about one outstanding solution, but obviously this is a global challenge that needs investment and action on a massive scale. So we are really pleased to be joined by Ben Hartley of Sustainable Energy for All to speak a little bit about the global picture. Ben, welcome. So Ben, tell us, how many people around the world are at risk because they lack access to reliable cooling solutions and cold chain? And are there particular countries or communities that are in particular danger?
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me. This has been really fascinating. It's not, photography is not something I know a lot about, and I feel like I've learned a lot already. So yeah, I work for the UN Sustainable Energy for All initiative. One of the programs that we run is on cooling for all. And some of the work that we do at the Cooling for All program measures globally how many people are at risk because they lack access to cooling. And in 2021, our research shows that across 54 high-impact countries, there are approximately 1.09 billion people who are at high risk because they lack access to cooling for safety during a heat wave, safe vaccines, or nutritious food delivered through agricultural cold chains. That number has grown by about 50 million people over the course of the last year, in large part due to the poverty impact of the pandemic, which is the first increase we've seen. That also includes about 732 million people in the urban poor, and I guess it's divided. Those at high risk are divided between the rural poor and the urban poor. But I think the thing here is that access to cooling and risk exists across a spectrum that includes things like access for human comfort and safety, access to cold chains and cold chains for ag, and cold chains for medical purposes. So it's very hard, and there have been a lot of efforts that have been underway to sort of identify how many people might be at risk because they lack cold chain. But what we do know, and some new estimates are telling us, are saying that basically if unaddressed, cold chain a lack of agricultural cold chain can directly result in the loss of about 475 million tons, or 13% of total food production, which is worth about 350 billion annually, and in theory is enough to feed about 950 million people, although the caloric values will be differentiated. So in addition to the 1.09 billion at high risk, there's about 2.34 billion that represent a different kind of risk. And these are members of an increasingly affluent sort of lower middle class that are on the brink of purchasing their first cooling device, so a refrigerator, for example. But there's risk that that device is inefficient and could lock in lots of long-term negative climate effects. So about 3.4 billion people across 54 high impact countries. But I think, what we've noticed at SE for All is that we can't simply zero in on risk in high impact countries. We also have a set of critical 9 countries that includes Bangladesh, Brazil, China, India, Indonesia, Mozambique, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Sudan. This year, we expanded our analysis to 22 additional countries because, those high impact ones can belie the fact that there are countries that may have higher incomes and better energy access, but still pockets of risk in, for example, poorer rural areas. We looked at 22 additional countries this year and found that there are about 172 million more people who are at high risk in countries like Mexico, Ethiopia, and Colombia. And then lastly, I'd sort of be remiss to say, because I'm from Western Canada, and I think this week's news has sort of shown us that even in the most developed countries, there are cooling access risks that can result from the impacts of climate change. And it very much depends on where you and what your sort of human experience is. And if temperatures spike dramatically relative to what your comfort level is, it can cause excess mortality, as we saw in the last few days.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ben, for really putting this into context for us so powerfully. And tackling this issue is about more than technology, isn't it? So how can investors, funders, policymakers, other actors tackle this issue?
Yeah, so this is sort of an interesting topic. So technology is really just one element of it. Depending on where you sit, there are a lot of different tools at your disposal to support sustainable cooling. And in one of our reports last year, we sort of got into a way of thinking about different solutions types, which includes technology. But among the other categories that we look at are things like policy, which includes performance standards for technologies, financial solutions, which includes things like grants and sort of financial approaches like cooling as a service, which aims to lower the upfront costs of an efficient technology or an efficient solution. And then things like services, which people don't often think about, but can include things like project preparation. So that's a lot of what goes into urban planning or sort of other sort of planning efforts, as well as maintenance and the human resources and capacity building that is necessary to keep cooling equipment running for long periods of time. So the COVID example is interesting because there's going to be a lot of procurement of cooling technologies to support the vaccine rollout. And over time, we're going to need to back that up with human resources and capacity that can keep that equipment functioning well into the future so that it can support things like booster shots or a lasting legacy on the agricultural cold chain side. So I think that's really sort of underappreciated. And even within technology, I think we think of air conditioners and fridges and sort of active things, but there's also the passive side. So things like cool roofs are the sort of very in example, but passive cooling, things like programs that are designed to help you or designed to ensure that men aren't wearing full suits in the summer or things like that, AC set points, behavior change, all these things come together. And yeah, everyone sort of has a role. Investors can set requirements for energy efficiency in their projects. Technology providers can help ensure that solutions are both affordable and sustainable at scale by working with the public sector. And then, we need governments, cities, regional, state, national, to sort of set policy signals. So those are all important things that everyone can do individually. But I think, you know, collaboration is collaboration is crucially important. And the Cool Coalition is one initiative that we've seen grow over the last few years that is really important and has brought a lot of partners together to collaborate on different issues that have affected access to cooling and energy, clean and energy efficient cooling worldwide. And then I would just say also that this year, so I would say joining the Cool Coalition is a good step folks can take. And then this year we have a sort of a unique opportunity. We have the United Nations Food Systems Summit coming up in September, as well as the UN High-Level Dialogue on Energy, the first one in 40 years. So these are good opportunities to make new commitments on cooling, including, you know, the agricultural cold chain side. And cooling agricultural cold chain is among those initiatives under sort of the fast action tracks for the UN Food Systems Summit. And then of course COP26, where we're hoping to see countries include commitments on cooling and cold chain in their NDCs. So yeah, that's wrap it up there. Sorry for talking too long.
Brilliant, thanks, Ben. And just to finish, I mean, given the scale of the issue that we're talking about, how do we make sure that wider access to cooling doesn't drive up carbon emissions?
Yeah. I mean, so we know now that cooling is driving up energy demand at a really high pace. And if left unchecked, it will require new capacity. If it's driven by active cooling technologies, it's going to require new energy capacity. And of course, there's a real risk that demand is met with coal or fossil fuels that gets locked in over time. So, you know, it's a matter of ensuring that there's a better sort of clean energy offer on the table for countries to get sort of renewables and into the power grid and maximize energy efficiency. But in terms of cooling specifically, it's about using every tool in the toolbox that we have to use less energy to keep people cool. So we have to be thinking systematically about how we deliver cooling. It's not just about the technology. It's about you know, building and city design. It's about things like district cooling where it's feasible, white roofs and passive cooling so that air conditioners don't have to do as much work where they're needed. Behavior change, like I said before, can also really help. And in off-grid settings where or, you know, where countries may have energy access gaps, you know, off-grid cooling solutions can help support those countries in terms of expansion of energy access for productive use in particular, and help alleviate some of the grid-related concerns that countries with energy access deficits might be experiencing because of it. So, yeah, it's about taking a systems approach to this and thinking, you know, beyond the technology. We need to look at every tool that we have to make sure that we reduce the amount of energy that we need for cooling to absolutely the least amount possible.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ben. And I can highly recommend getting involved with the Cool Coalition. For us, it's been a great source of insight on these sorts of issues. Fantastic. So I think we now have about 15 minutes for questions from the audience. I can see a few that have come in on the chat, and I'll pick some of those up in a second. Equally, if any of the panelists have comments or questions for each other, please do raise your hand or make your question known, and that would be great as well. I think just to kick off, I've seen a few questions come in for Jiten, which I think you have answered in the chat, but perhaps just to bring them to the wider group. A few questions on your model. Can you say a little bit about your business model? What kinds of products need to be focused on within the cool chain? And I think there was a question about the COVID impact in the villages that you've been working in specifically as well.
Sure, and it'd be good to get input from others here as well. What we believe is that decentralized cold storage and infrastructure from farm to fork can bring about new opportunities and food products to service local markets and urban areas. And so, for example, by bringing tailored decentralized infrastructure suitable for this environment, we're enabling new opportunities for products for the local community, as well as for urban centers. by having better quality milk, chilled at the source, and creating new opportunities for either value addition or supply to further markets. And this could apply to milk and or vegetables or other produce. And what is needed is the investment in the initial infrastructure to create these possibilities. And once you create and set up this network, I think the exciting part is how can others participate in this and utilize this infrastructure in new ways. And that's what we're hoping to see some effects. And I think, Prashanth, I think it's great to hear that, at least from your field experience, the feedback or interest in engaging with you gives some sense that there is some opportunity and need, and people are seeing some of the possibilities. Just one small example, and then I'll turn it over. By creating this infrastructure, whether we sell the equipment or rent it or offer it on a pay-per-use basis, many existing players or new players will have opportunities for new models. And just in the last week, you get inquiries for, can there be production of small scale, value-added products from this area? Can the local consumers purchase milk from this group? And as we create these decentralized assets and infrastructure, we're excited about the possibilities.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jiten. Toby.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on something earlier after Prashanth's second talk, and Jiten's just segued it again. Firstly, I think Prashanth's being incredibly modest about his skills as a photojournalist, and Jiten has just brought in one of the critical points of that, is that good storytelling on the ground is not just about the images or the kind of public profile it produced, but it can produce such really rich detail and insights that someone who has a relationship with those communities can offer, that potentially a formal representative, whether that be a sales rep or someone in a more senior role, isn't either at a great trajectory to do or might not be skilled to do. I think good photojournalists and journalists have that ability to kind of move into a community and really get a temperature check quite quickly as to what's happening there. And it's a lovely example here to see that be an asset to a service provider. And I know this is something that Ashton are looking at doing with how they're going to do the reporting on their awards over the next few years as well. And I wish you guys the best with that. The other point I just wanted to quickly bring in is, well, Prashanth was asked why the story is such a success, and he's brought a really local perspective on that. But I think my international perspective on that is that dairy, milk delivering on our doorstep, obviously has that sense of how it's done in that community. But this is a story or a narrative that happens to me here on my driveway in Gloucestershire. A van comes and drops off some milk in recyclable bottles. So as a story, this is something I can relate to. And I think that's a real good principle of what makes climate photography. Is sometimes people feel distanced or alienated from stories they see, whereas a story with a narrative like this is something that myself or audiences globally can relate to, because so often milk and milk production is something that's universal to a lot of different kind of countries worldwide. So yeah, I just wanted to pick up on those two. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Toby. And are there any other examples of that you've seen through your work?
Narratives wise, certainly. I think I'll go for the big ones because they're really powerful as concepts. Emotional engagement. There's some concepts in human nature that I hope are truly universal. Things about parenthood, the vulnerability and the safety of children. And when that intersects with issues of things like air quality or nutrition, they're sometimes really overused and, dare I say, occasionally cliched, but some of these universal human values that we all appreciate, when they're captured through photography and related to an issue that we're otherwise quite distant to, can be extremely powerful. But the other kind of universal value that I think is within this story as well is we have to be careful when reporting on certain circumstances, especially ones with really negative impacts and emotional impacts, is that that can leave people feeling overwhelmed. And one of the really bits of universal advice we have around communications in general, and especially visuals, is how can we also cover solutions, positive, meaningful things that we can all do and change at a community or an individual level, and coupling those with negative emotional stories is such a powerful trajectory to move people through. And I think that's another reason why Prashanth's small story, although shot in such a finite amount of time, is so strong, because it has the problem, potential solutions, and the background in there.
Brilliant, thank you, Toby. Another question that's come in on the chat relating to Promethean's work and climate impacts. So Kerry Ann Brown asks, is there any concern about commodifying milk and dairy and this adding small scale milk production into the mix? Are there any issues around this being unsustainable further down the line from a climate perspective? And perhaps Jiten and or Ben might have a view on this.
I'm sure I can start, and then would love to hear from others. I agree. This is a tricky issue, and I think there is a footprint for all different types of food systems. And what we're trying to promote here is access to decentralized infrastructure to enable sustainable models. And it will be likely a mix of small-scale farming, as you point out, and also some large-scale processing. And then over time, how can we work together to design a more sustainable model for the local community, and to help continue to supply the growing demand in India for better and fresher dairy products, and also help continue to support livelihoods for small and marginalized farmers, as they're a significant portion of the economy and community in India. And so I think working together, developing the right ecosystem and designing the right infrastructure to support all stakeholders is, I think, the ideal approach. And working together is I think, the way that we can go about that.
Yeah, just to quickly say, I agree. I think it's a combination of factors, but agriculture, sort of writ large, is, you know, one of the dominant, or if not the dominant, then one of the most dominant sectors in most countries, or most developing countries around the world, and not just in terms of GDP, but in terms of job growth, right? And you know, our view has been that cooling is something that really helps to enable movement from what might be subsistence farming to, you know, farming, or sort of farming of higher value crops that can move folks up the income ladder and generate more jobs locally. And that's a very powerful argument for intervention, in particular on the cooling side. But yeah, I really agree. That's a very tricky issue. And I think the economics of that movement, I don't think are perfectly understood, but I think the climate sort of dimensions of it are even less well understood. So yeah, it's a good question.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think time for just one last question, and perhaps this is one for Jiten or Prashanth. Has working with the Fair Cooling Fund and on this project, has it opened your eyes to new ways of using communications within this sort of project?
Yeah. Can you just like repeat the question? I was a little bit, I lost the last part.
Sure. I guess having worked on this this photo series within the Fair Cooling Fund and seen the response of putting it out into the world, has it given you any thoughts around new ways of using communications for these sorts of programs, such as the Fair Cooling Fund?
Yeah, like I initially had said that I have been shooting, you know, climate change and drought for maybe over 11, 12 years now. I get very few stories that are solution oriented, like Toby put it. So there is a result here, right? This is not talking about, also we forgot to mention this throughout. I think Latour is also comes in the suicide rate of farmers. So there is that issue too, like the income generation that we are just coining in like a word called income generation. Like, I don't know how to convert it in pounds, but 20,000 rupees is the reason people commit suicide in that area. 20,000 rupees would be hardly like, I don't know in pounds how much it would be. I'm sorry, I'll calculator, but it will be very less. So it's a few hundred pounds, So that is the reason people are losing lives there. So there is a huge impact, even if there is a little bit income generation opportunity with anything, that is given to them. Also, that it is one thing that I would like to say, it's not free, right? So there is that thing about, that they are paying for the system there. It's important for sustainability. I have seen a lot of programs where people have donated stuff and it just dies away because the donor is gone after a while. Who can donate forever? And India, the scale of India is also huge. That is another thing from the field I tell you, that a big village in India is like 2 cities in Europe, I guess. So it's crazy. So the scale of the village that looks like small is huge number of people living in it. Like not so much in Maharashtra maybe, but if you ever start this program in UP, and this conference will have 500 people, because the problem is that the scale is huge. So the point is the local at local level, it's very good to see a program where actually Latour is a tough terrain. So it's really hot. It's like there's a heat wave going on right now in India. And I thought it was getting over because it was very hot last 4 days. And now I got news that red alert for heat wave for the next 3 days. I'm like, I don't know what's going to go more than this. I think it's 40 plus degrees Celsius right now in Delhi. So I can't imagine what's in Latour right now. So I'm just trying to say those kind of, actually it was eye-opening for me to see that there is a very good solution that has already been put in place. But I went at the fag end of the project. So like Toby Butcher, if I had gone through the the whole process of before and after throughout the project, it would have been far more impactful visually also to think about, I always feel I missed something here. What were they doing before all this happened? What was there? So
yeah. Thank you so much, Prashant. I think that's putting it into that context is a really a good way to finish, I think. And I think we're just about at time. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I think this has been a fascinating and really wide-ranging discussion. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you also to KSEP, whose investment has made the Fair Cooling Fund possible. And you can learn more about the Fair Cooling Fund on Ashton's website, where you can find all our contact details as well.